Good morning and welcome to the Killik & Co Market Update. This week we've had the publication of the long-awaited Labour manifesto, and it does contain a number of items that have been previously mentioned. For example, the proposed nationalisation of UK energy networks, UK utilities, Royal Mail and National Grid. But it does also contain a couple of little surprises. For example, a hike in corporation tax from 19 to 26% and also a windfall tax on oil companies. Now, this manifesto has been quite widely criticised for not being credible. For example, some of the numbers that Labour has put forward to assume the cost of nationalisation are thought to be quite unrealistic. For example, Labour has estimated that the cost of nationalising BT would be in the region of £20 billion. BT, on the other hand, estimates the cost would be closer to £100 billion once they've taken into account all the pension commitments that BT had. So that's a huge difference there, between £20 billion to £100 billion. The manifesto has also been criticised for assuming that high earners and corporations would not change their behaviour after this new higher tax rate is imposed, whereas in reality, if a higher earner was taxed at a much higher rate and not allowed to keep as much of the income they're earning, there's probably not as much incentive for them to work as hard. Corporations, if their tax rate goes up from 19 to 26%, there's probably less incentive for them to stay remaining in the UK. So those are just a couple of reasons why some people have said that this manifesto is not particularly credible. I think what was quite interesting about this manifesto when it was published was the stock market reaction, or rather the lack thereof. There really wasn't a very large movement at all in the stock market when this manifesto was published. So I think perhaps that demonstrates that the perception of the likelihood of Corbyn actually getting into power is not as high as it once was. I think probably going back to early 2018, that's probably the time when the perception was that Corbyn would get in was probably the highest it has been. So let's have a look at the share prices then compared to now of some of the companies that Corbyn wants to nationalise. First up, National Grid. You can see that the price fell quite heavily as we moved into early 2018, but since then actually the share price has recovered somewhat. The same for Severn Trent, a water company. Again, you can see the share price fell as we moved into 2018, but since then again it has recovered, and neither of these share prices moved significantly when this manifesto was published. So I think that perhaps demonstrates that the perceived likelihood of a Corbyn victory or a Corbyn majority is not as high as it once was. And also this week we've been having a look at the market for digital payments. Here in the UK, we're actually incredibly advanced in terms of electronic and digital payments. Most of us are very used to using our contactless payment cards. And actually the UK is the third most cashless society in the world. And I think because of that, we do sometimes forget just how far behind the rest of the world is. Even the US, for example, is incredibly far behind in terms of contactless payments. And actually a report that was published earlier this year estimated that less than 5% of payment cards in the US actually have the contactless functionality. And if we look further wider at the rest of the world, we can see there that 1.7 billion adults in the world still do not even have a bank account. So think about the huge opportunity for electronic and digital payments as more and more of these adults start to come online. I think further evidence of this huge opportunity within the payments market is the fact that a lot of these big tech companies are starting to move into the space. For example, we've got Apple Pay, we've got Facebook Pay, we've got Google Pay, we've got Samsung Pay. Apple has launched a credit card, Amazon has just launched a credit card in conjunction with JP Morgan, and Google has announced it is going to be launching current accounts next year. So I think the fact that all of these companies are trying to move into the payment space just shows how big this opportunity is. So we've just talked about how good the UK is in terms of contactless payments, but something else the UK is very good at is drinking coffee. Some new data shows that the average person in the UK drinks 676 cups of coffee per year, really quite a huge number. And it's quite interesting to have a look at the numbers for the rest of the world and see how much lower they are. And so have a look at these numbers here. People in Tokyo apparently drink 400 cups per year, Hong Kong 100, Shanghai 40, But probably the most interesting number is the average for the whole of India and China, just 3 cups per day. So really an incredibly low number there. And I think that just shows how much potential for growth there is in the market for coffee. So please do give us a call if you'd like to hear more about our thoughts on the world coffee market. Now, moving on to the week ahead, it's Black Friday week, so we'll be keeping an eye on those retail sales. And in terms of companies reporting next week, we'll be looking out for results from Eon and from Marston's. That's it from us. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.